Hey guys, another episode has been cleared for public release, but just barely. Today we're talking about something that almost every contractor thinks they need more of, and that's documentation. Everyone believes they need more notes and more forms, more screenshots and emails, all of it saved to the same file. With more PDFs with names like vendor selection, support, final, version 4, actually final. Because when something goes wrong, the first reaction is almost always the exact same. Well, we need better documentation. But the question is, do you? Do you really need better documentation? Or do you just need better decisions before the documentation shows up? Because documentation is not magic. You can't take a weak decision, wrap it in 12 attachments, and sprinkle on a few approvals and the words fair and reasonable, and suddenly turn it into a defensible business decision. It just doesn't work that way. That is not compliance. That's more or less arts and crafts with risk exposure. And contractors just love doing this. A file looks weak, they'll add more documentation. And if our logic is unclear, and we add more documentation. If the price doesn't make sense, well, we'll add a memo explaining why it totally made sense at the time, which is always comforting, right up there with legal said it was probably fine. But most of the time, the problem is not that the file needed more paper. The problem is that the decision underneath the paper was very thin, or rushed, or inconsistent, or based on an assumption that no one challenged. And under fixed price contracting, that gets really expensive really fast, because more documentation will not fix unclear scope. It will not fix a bad pricing assumption, or travel that you didn't price, or a materials risk that went unevaluated. More documentation will not fix the customer direction that should have been treated as a change order. And it's definitely not going to fix a fixed price commitment your company should not have accepted in the first place. So today we're going to talk about why you probably do not need more documentation, but you need better decisions. Because if your decision is weak, the file does not need a bigger binder. It needs a better brain.
This broadcast has been cleared for public release, but just barely.
Broadcasting from deep inside the Federal Acquisition Labyrinth, this is the GovCon Show. This show is for acquisition pros, wannabe pros, and procurement insiders who need a place to unpack the chaos. We speak fluent contracting and sarcasm. No clearance required. This is the GovCon Show. And away we go!
Hey guys, welcome back to the GovCon Show. As you know, we're broadcasting from deep within the acquisition labyrinth. And here, every file has a story to tell. Every system suffers from a personality disorder. And every quick fix becomes a new policy before the week is over. In our previous episodes, we've talked about policies that do not control behavior, that fixed price pressure, and how price analysis turns into price justification, and cost-type habits walking into fixed price work. Today, we're going to get to the thing companies reach for when it all starts to show: documentation. Because when a file gets questioned, when a customer asks for support, or when a pricing decision wobbles, when a subcontract issue shows up, or when the margins start looking like it needs medical attention, the reflex is usually the same. We need to document things better. And sometimes, yes, you do. Documentation matters. Documentation is required. Documentation is how the record explains what happened, but documentation has a job, and that job is not to rescue a bad decision after the fact. So let's play this one out. For example, let's say something goes wrong. A decision gets challenged. A reviewer asks a question nobody likes, and immediately the team adds more narrative, more explanation, and more justification. Probably even adds a few more boxes on the template checklist. More memos get sent around that sounds like legal, procurement, and the thesaurus were having a group project. And on the subject, all that feels really responsible. The record looks bigger. The file looks more complete. But more words do not fix bad decisions. Most of the time, they just give the reviewer more material to read before reaching the exact same conclusion. So the real question is not, did you explain it? The real question is, did your decision make sense before you started explaining it? That's the difference. You see, documentation is supposed to explain a decision, not replace it, not disguise it, or defend it. Good documentation follows a good decision. It shows what happened and why it happened, what was considered and what supported the outcome. It gives someone who was not in the room a clear path through your logic. That's what documentation is supposed to do. But all too often, documentation becomes something else. It becomes an explanation after the fact, or a justification for a decision that was already made. A narrative designed to make something sound reasonable that was never properly supported in the first place. And that's where the order gets backward. Good processes look like this: decision and then documentation. Bad decisions look like this: decision, problem, panic, documentation trying to fix it. And that is not a process. That's a cleanup scene, probably with folders. Now, this is where fixed price makes the issue even sharper, because if you have a fixed price contract, that just makes this so much less forgiving. Because under fixed price, documentation does not just explain a procurement decision, it may become the record of the risk your company has accepted. What scope did you agree to? What schedule did you rely on? What about your subcontractor? What subcontractor commitments supported your promise to the government? If those decisions were weak, more documentation is not going to make them stronger. It will just show the weakness much more clearly. A beautiful memo cannot make vague scope suddenly clear. A checklist cannot make customer-dependent performance controllable. And a paragraph written after the fact cannot turn a bad fixed-price decision into a good one. That's your danger. Documentation creates visibility, and visibility cuts both ways. If the decision was strong, documentation helps prove it. And that is great. That is what you want. But if the decision was weak, rushed, or inconsistent, unsupported, or based on assumption that nobody challenged, all that documentation points you right to that. Sometimes even with the page numbers. So when people say at least it's documented, I always want to ask them, well, documented how? Because documented does not automatically mean defensible. Sometimes it just means you've assigned the weakness a folder, a tab, and a page number. And that beautiful memo you struggled over, the one that took you a couple hours to write, it may show that nobody compared anything. It may show that the team knew about the risk, but moved on anyway. That checklist, the one that you double-checked twice, it's going to show somebody checked the box without actually controlling the decision. So yes, documentation matters. But documentation is not a substitute for good judgment. and it is definitely not a substitute for firm fixed price discipline. If the company accepted unclear scope, more documentation will not remove the ambiguity. And if pricing assumed travel would be minimal, more documentation is not going to pay for the plane ticket. If you ignored the potential for volatile material pricing, more documentation will not stabilize the market. And if the subcontracts team failed to align the subcontract's terms, more documentation is not going to make the subcontractor perform what it never agreed to do. Like I said earlier, documentation can cut both ways. It is not the rescue squad, it is your witness. And sometimes the witness does not help your case. And just like everything else we've talked about this season, issues with your documentation does not show up all at once. It shows up across multiple decisions, across proposals and files, across programs and subcontract actions. One file has a long explanation, but no support. Another has a pricing memo, but no tested assumptions. Another has a fixed price commitment, but no clear scope boundaries. And yet another one has subcontract terms that do not match the prime's risk. And now it's not a documentation problem. All of that is a decision-making problem. That's the part that matters. That's the part you need to worry about. Because if the same kinds of documentation gaps keep showing up, the answer is probably not, let's require documentation. The question you should be asking is, why are we making decisions that need this much explaining after the fact? That question is much harder, but it is also much more useful because fixing documentation is easy. Fixing decision quality requires structure, discipline, and consistency. Clear standards and the willingness to stop pretending a better memo can fix a weak call. So never forget that. Documentation, both the good and the bad, is a reflection of your practices. It is tangible. It is easy to change. You can update a template by Friday. You can require another memo. You can hold a training session called Documentation Expectations Going Forward, which sounds very important and relevant. But documentation does not create good decisions. Good decisions create good documentation, and that's the shift we all have to make. Documentation is not the solution. It is the reflection. And if what it reflects is inconsistent, unsupported, unclear, rushed, or built on untested fixed-price assumptions, more documentation just makes that reflection much bigger. And bigger is not always better. The goal is not to write more. The goal is to decide better, then document clearly. That's the correct order. And this is one of the main reasons why we built the fixed price conversion risk assessment. Because before a contractor accepts firm fixed price risk, they need to answer the important questions. Should we make this decision at all? Is the scope mature enough suddenly? Are ODCs and travel materials priced, or are they just projected? Are subcontractors aligned? Are teaming agreements aligned? Are performance metrics controllable? Is the schedule realistic? Is change control strong enough? That's where the work is. So before you accept firm fixed price risk and then try to document your way through the consequences, take a hard look at the decision itself. Go over to our website at govconadvisorygroup.com and run the fixed price conversion risk assessment. And if your issue is broader, if your policies, procedures, and internal processes are not controlling behavior, while you're there, run the policy control diagnostic too, because more documentation is not going to fix weak decisions. It just gives them better lighting. So before you add another memo, before you revise another template, And before you create one more checklist that everybody will follow for about 3 weeks before they return to how they actually do it, stop and ask, are we documenting the decision or are we trying to rescue it? Because if you're trying to rescue it, the problem is not the documentation. The problem has already happened. And under fixed price, that weak decision may not just become an audit issue. It may become a profit issue or a scope issue, a cash flow problem, a real issue that threatens your entire business. So don't just build heavier files, build stronger decisions, then document them. Okay, guys, that's it for this episode. And if we've helped you think differently about fixed price risk, subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Hit that like button and share this episode with someone whose contract is being pushed toward from fixed price before the risk has been fully understood. If your team needs help in identifying where the risk is hiding, go to govconadvisorgroup.com and run that fixed price conversion risk assessment. If you want to know more about us, check out our team at govconadvisorgroup.com. Or if you'd benefit from formalized contracts training courses or sessions, head over to contractsclassroom.com. As always, we're broadcasting from deep inside the Federal Acquisition Labyrinth, where getting anything done requires a map, a meeting, 3 approvals, and someone is still yelling, "Let's circle back." Don't forget, this episode's been cleared for public release, but just barely.
If today's episode sounded a little too familiar, that's probably a sign. Until next time, keep your files tight, your logic tighter. Remember, if your compliance approach is built on checking boxes, you're building risk. We'll see you next time on the GovCon Show.
This broadcast has been cleared for public release, but just barely.